Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well, and welcome to, depending on wherever you may live or however you choose to read your clock this early morning or middle of the night, bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. And yeah, folks, they definitely matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to this early morning, middle of the night bonus upload. Shall we? Today's first encounter. I live in the small town of Milford, Michigan. I've heard stories, but I wasn't too sure about what they were describing. A tall creature that creeps on all fours until startled or enters chase, then proceeds to stand on two. A tall, dark figure that looks like a dog. I thought these people must be crazy. Deer can do some weird stuff. My friend recently shared an encounter he had about a year ago. My friend, let's call him Sam, went outside to have a cigarette at around 1 o'clock in the morning. His yard has a hill that slopes down from his circle driveway all the way to a flat area near his basement door. If you walk out of his basement, directly in front of you is a pond, and to the left is a shed they used to use. At first, he noticed nothing, but as he looked closer, he noticed a dark figure on all fours. He took out his cell phone and shined the flashlight on this creature. To his surprise, this thing stood on two legs, screeched at him, and ran off into the woods. He told us about this encounter the next morning, and then took us to the spot he saw. Sure enough, dog prints. That wasn't really unusual, though, because he lives next to a subdivision, and we've already helped his neighbors find their dogs about 3 times since they moved in. So we shrugged it off. He then brought me into the woods where the creature ran into, and there was a clear path that something took to get through. As much as Sam tried to convince me, I still thought it was a deer until recently. A couple of weeks ago, I went for a drive to go to Walmart to pick up some beer, just to relax and hang out with friends. Everything was perfectly fine. The moon was out, so you could see just a little bit. There was no snow or rain, just a little dampness on the road from the previous rainfall about an hour beforehand. I was on my way back to my house, and I was driving up this curvy hilled road, up to the top of the hill, the only one in my subdivision. And I noticed something in my neighbor's yard. Now, I see deer in the subdivision all the time, and I've actually hit one on one occasion. So I decided to slow down. This thing was definitely the same size as a deer, so I didn't have any second thoughts, that is, until I got close and it ran out in front of my car. Now, normally when a deer runs in front of your car, they either freeze or run right by, and there are normally 2 or 3 of them. This was a single case, and when it ran across the road, albeit on 4 legs, it didn't run the same as a deer. When it ran, it didn't lift its head. It had it low to the ground, and it looked like it was sniffing something. It then lifted its head and looked, more like glared at me, and bolted off to my right. But not before, shortly after stopping right out of my view. I could still see the figure standing there, but I couldn't make out what it was. All I could see was it was standing on its hind legs, and what looked like it was staring at me. I kept trying to get my eyes to adjust from the bright of my headlights to the dark of the side of the road, but It just wouldn't happen. When I tried to turn my car around so I could shine my headlights at it, it bolted down the hill into the woods, all the while staying on two legs. I still remember the face that I saw when that thing glared at me. It looked like a wolf, but was the size of a buck. That was the scariest moment of my life, and I have never seen anything like that before. I've Googled some info about it and found something about the Michigan Dogman, but I don't want to be classified as one of those crazies. I can still see it standing on its hind legs, looking at me in the dark. Tonight's second encounter. 8 years ago, when I was 16, I lived with my mom, my two sisters, in a house that could only be described as creepy, maybe borderline haunted. Hell, maybe definitely haunted is the best way to describe it. I'd always been fascinated by the thought of ghosts, but terrified of it and skeptical at the same time. But all it took was one night to completely convince me. There are things we not only shouldn't meddle with, but should respect and show great caution towards. Our house was in a moderately wealthy suburban area, roughly 45-minute drive outside of an average Midwestern city. Think lots of lush trees, winding roads, nature preserves, public schools with very high standards, and a lot of history. We'd been living there for a few years, and we'd begun to notice strange things happen late at night. Almost always when we were separated from each other, sleeping in separate rooms, or when one of us was home alone. Strange noises, dramatic changes in temperature, electronics behaving strangely. Our pets, 2 dogs and 2 cats, acting odd. One time, we had 2 house cleaners quit in the middle of their appointment at our house, looking pale and terrified, convinced they had heard voices whispering in their ears while they were vacuuming the basement. Another time I had a friend stay over who woke me up at 4 a.m, begging me to let him sleep in my room, claiming he woke up and saw a figure watching him sleep. I had always written these occurrences off as being creepy, but nothing to worry about. I just assumed they were rational explanations behind everything. Until this one night, the night that changed my life. The night that made me believe. I'd just gotten back home with 2 of my friends, Evan and James. It was 1 a.m, and we had been out late for a high school football game. We had picked up some fast food on the way home. We're sitting in my basement. The basement was finished and very large. My bedroom was down there, an office as well. And there was a sort of second living room with a big TV, futon, and chairs. We were playing Xbox, Halo of course, and joking around, when we heard a door slam upstairs. We thought it was strange, so I went upstairs to take a look. The door to the garage, oddly enough, was wide open, and the garage door itself was also open. There was no one in the garage, however, so I closed the garage door, closed the door to the garage, and locked the deadbolt. I walked around the house, couldn't find anyone, and nothing seemed out of ordinary, so I shrugged it off and went back downstairs. It was 5 minutes later when we heard the same door slamming sound, this time even louder and twice in a row. It sounded like someone was slamming the door in a rage. We paused the game, and this time Evan and James went upstairs with me. We checked the door to the garage, and it was wide open again. The garage door was still closed. We were all thoroughly freaked out, but being 16-year-olds and wanting to seem tough, we managed to turn our fear into anger. We assumed someone had broken into the house. We grabbed various weapons. I grabbed a baseball bat, Evan pulled out his Swiss Army knife, and James grabbed my pellet gun. We went through the entire house. We checked every closet, every cupboard, and every room. I checked on my little sisters. They share a bunk bed. They were both sleeping soundly. I checked my mom. She was asleep as well. Both of the dogs were in her room, and the cats were on the windowsill. We argued about what it could have been, made fun of each other for being scared, and laughed about it. And after 5 minutes, headed back downstairs. Before we could even reach the bottom step, we heard one very loud slam with our makeshift weapons. We ran back up the steps as fast as we could to see if we could catch whatever was making that sound. This time, the door to the back porch was wide open, and we heard footsteps. We ran into the living room, and the front door was wide open. We saw what looked like a dark figure running out of my front yard. All three of us argued for a minute. Evan said, "Man, call the police, call 'em." I agreed, but before I could, James took off running after the figure. Screw it. We ran and caught up with him. It was almost pitch black outside. We lived right by the woods. We couldn't see James anywhere. "Screw this," Evan said. "I'm going home." "We can't just leave him. God damn it. Let's just keep looking for him. In all honesty, I just didn't want to be alone in the woods." "All right, let's go." We started walking through the woods. We're both calling for James, but we weren't hearing anything. I could barely see a thing in the woods. The moon wasn't out tonight, and unfortunately there weren't any trails in this section. We pushed through branch after branch, tripping over roots and shrubs, wet with dew, getting covered in spider webs on the way. Finally, we heard James. "Guys, come here, come here." He sounded excited, but not in a frightened way. He sounded like he had just found a case of beer. We followed the sound of his voice and caught up with him at the break in the woods. He was standing on the edge of a very large field. Strange, I thought, since there was nothing at all in the field. It looked man-made. The grass was short and well kept, but there were no signs of any roads or trails leading to it. He greeted us, smiling and full of excitement. He pointed at the ground. There were some strange animal tracks. "Look, elk tracks, dude. My dad and I are totally coming back here tomorrow and bagging that thing." James was ecstatic. He came from a hunting family and would often go hunting with his dad. Evan was furious. "What's up, man? Don't run off like that. Not cool." I was pretty irritated but relieved that we had found him. We sat down and lit up a cigarette and split it between us three. Evan would steal them from his older brother. Things calmed down and we just started talking about what had happened, and we all hesitantly decided that it was probably nothing to be worried about. I was still very nervous, however, because the elk tracks James had found didn't look right to me. They looked like hooves, sure, but they were huge and had little claw-like markings coming out off of them. But James insisted that they were indeed elk tracks. After a few minutes, Evan was giving James a lot of crap for running off. He finally got up and said, "Guys, guess who I am?" and took off running into the field. James laughed and went running after him. I reluctantly took up the chase. But they were going so fast, I just yelled, "Screw you guys," and turned back. I sat back down where we'd been sitting and figured I'd wait for them to come back. A couple of minutes later, they had run so far off I couldn't see them anymore. I started calling for them, but I didn't hear anything. I started to get scared. Here I was by myself in the middle of an already strange night deep in the woods, and my friends had seemingly abandoned me. I kept telling myself there was nothing to be scared of, but then I heard rustling behind the tree line that was at my back. I turned around and I didn't see anything. I started to get more and more scared. I heard it again. This time it sounded like it was closer. I stood up quickly and strained my eyes in the darkness, trying to see where the sound was coming from. I figured it could be Evan or James trying to scare me. "Guys, this isn't funny," I said. Rustling again, this time even closer. I strained my eyes as hard as I could and started to back away from the tree line. "Guys, seriously, this isn't funny. Stop." And then it happened. I saw too many eyes looking back at me. Two large, deep eyes reflecting back at me. The same way dogs' eyes reflect at night, in the right angle. I froze with fear. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't do anything. Then all of a sudden the eyes slowly started to raise up, accompanied by that same rustling sound. They kept rising and rising until they were towering over me. This thing had to be at least 7 feet tall. I was shaking. I couldn't breathe. I stared back into them, totally paralyzed, and then in an instant they disappeared. I didn't know what to do. I snapped back into reality for a second and turned around to see if I could see my friends in the field. To a huge relief, I saw their dark silhouettes walking back slowly, and I could barely make out their voices. And then I felt something breathing down the back of my neck. I couldn't hear anything. I just felt a warm breath breathing right on the back of my neck. I turned around and the eyes, now black, were right in front of my face. I didn't have time to scream. I took off running in the other direction as fast as I could. I ran towards my friends. When I reached them, I ran right past them and barely let out a run, and kept going. I never moved so quickly in my life. I ran until I reached the other end of the field, and I kept going into the woods. I didn't look back. I was too afraid of seeing those eyes again. My sprint slowly turned into a jog, which slowly turned into a brisk pace, and then I knelt over in pain from running so long. I made myself look back to check if James and Evan were still with me. They weren't. I looked around, and off in the distance ahead of me I could see some lights. Thank God I mustered up all the energy I had left and trudged as quickly as I could towards them. Finally, I reached the break in the trees, and when I emerged, I was outside of a gas station. It was closed, but there was a payphone. I called 911 and stayed on the phone with the dispatcher. I told them my location first, and then as much as I could get out about what had just happened. A police officer pulled up pretty quick. It probably took him 3 minutes to get there, but in those 3 minutes, it felt like an eternity. After I explained the situation, he wanted to go investigate, but I begged him to take me home. He agreed. I told him he should send someone to look for my friends. He got on his radio and told them to send a couple of officers. It took us a good 30 minutes to get home. I couldn't believe how far from home I had gotten. He came to my house with me and woke my mom up. He checked every room to make sure nothing was there, spoke with my mom for a few minutes, and I fell asleep on the couch. I didn't hear from my friends all weekend. It wasn't until Monday that I learned James and his family were moving to another neighborhood. No explanation why. Wednesday, Evan showed up to school and he looked horrible, pale and downtrodden. I asked him over and over what had happened, but all he could say is, "I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk to you." We became distant and stopped hanging out. It wasn't until, a while ago that I talked to him for the first time since the ordeal. His account was that he saw the same red eyes, ran until he was out of breath, somehow found his way home, and got there at 7 a.m. His parents questioned him, and he lied. I just woke up early and wanted to come home, so I walked. The next day, his parents couldn't find his dog, an outdoor dog, but they found scratch marks and blood on the dog house, and they never saw his dog again. Tonight's third experience. West Pennsylvania, on Crescent Mountain in 1965. I was 7. I was exploring the woods with a friend who lived in the area. We crossed a stream at the bottom of a ravine and went up a hill. Maybe a mile up slope in trees, we came upon a dome made of interlaced tree branches. It was tall enough for me to enter without bending over. I did so. It stank horribly. Inside, we found fresh timothy grass lied out in kind of a pallet or a bed on one end. There was no debris of humankind anywhere, but there were small bones and sticks. We couldn't stand the odor and backed out, then felt we were being watched from up the slope. Growing nervous as dusk fell, we left and fast. Told his dad about it, who dismissed it as hobo's hutch. We found many of those. It was not a person who made what we had found. We glimpsed a shadow moving and maybe a glint of eyes as well. Reflective eyes can be down to something as simple as a lurker wearing glasses, we were told, but it had felt more animal than hobo to us. One foggy Saturday morning, I was again visiting my friend. We preferred roaming the woods to wandering town where we lived. We were sprawled on the floor watching an old horror movie neither of us understood. I think it was Dementia 13, which seemed incoherent. It did feature a good many spooky images and jump scares, so it held out our interest, especially with the fog that day. We heard a thump on the front door. Glancing across the living room, we saw a dog's face gazing at us through the middle 3 narrow windows set high on the door. It would have had to have been 6 to 7 feet tall to peer through those windows. Its gaze shined, and we both screamed, thinking, werewolf. As we gaped, it dropped down below the door's windows nervously. We peered out the picture window that took up most of one wall. In the fog, we saw it again, moving past just far enough away to be a little more than a shadow. Thing is, it was upright. It was sort of hop walking on its hind legs. Its forelegs were held out in front. This sight scared us even more. When it vanished, headed toward the tree line, we talked about whether the thing we had just seen could be what had made that domed nest we'd found not too long back. At the time, this seemed reasonable to us. We knew, though, not to tell his parents about a huge dog thing looking through the front door windows. We didn't want to be ridiculed again. But we did learn to be more careful when playing in the woods. Only years later did I hear about the Ohio Grassman, a Sasquatch analog for the area, where we fell within its range. Later still, western Pennsylvania began experiencing a cluster of what people called Dogman. Supposedly, it was pretty much what my friend and I had seen as kids, peering through his front door's windows and moving past his house as it went toward the trees. I'm glad we didn't encounter it directly either time, but kind of wish we had seen it more clearly before it moved away. Still gives me the chills thinking about being out in that mountain at dusk with something like that, or what would have happened had it gotten through that door. Tonight's final part of the upload is a subscriber submission. Jeff, longtime listener to your channel, never wanted to share before, but felt it my duty since I've been seeing what you've been doing. This is a case that you have never looked into, but has been near and dear to my heart because, well, you'll see. When I first took the job as a pest exterminator, I was told I would have my fair share of unpleasant encounters. Nothing, however, could have prepared for me of what I would discover at Susan Powell's home one cold December morning in Utah. It started when I received a complaint from her husband, Josh, about a persistent scraping noise that was keeping him and his wife up throughout the night. I proposed that it was a rodent and asked him if they had tried poison traps, which he said wouldn't work since the noise was coming from within their bedroom wall. Next, I told him to check around the exterior of his house for any noticeable holes where a rodent had slipped through. He said there were none. Running low on options, I called Powell's landlord and asked him about the foundation. He mentioned that there was a hinged door that would provide access to a crawl space beneath the house. I decided to settle on the idea that it was nothing more than a curious mole who had managed to tunnel underneath the house. I brought over several below-ground mole traps that resembled a smaller version of what fellow pest trappers like me call a bear shoe, and helped Josh set them up around the house. A few days later, Josh called me again and said the scraping hadn't stopped, so I told him I'd come over and take a look under the house. When I arrived, I was greeted at the door by Susan, who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Bags under her eyes were dark as her pupils. Her hair, which was neatly combed only a few days ago, now hung wild and matted like an old sticky mop. She called for Josh, and I met him out back by the old hinged door. He yelled through the floor for Susan to bang on the bedroom wall, and we crawled hand and foot to the spot. I carefully analyzed the dirt as we went, but I couldn't find any evidence of pests. Instead, it looked as if it was painted. There were streaks like brush strokes running every which direction. When we got to the spot, I inspected the long scratches that ran across a small portion of the wall. I'd never seen scratches like this on a building's foundation, and they were surprisingly deep and left the wood slightly splintered. I wasn't exactly sure how to proceed, so I called my boss and sent him pics of the engravings. He suggested that I leave a little of everything down there, so I did. I placed poison pellets along the side of the wall. I placed mole traps surrounding the area, and even placed a bear shoe directly in front of the markings. Nothing Neither coon nor rat was going to have an easy time getting to that wall. I gave the Powells my phone number before I left. I answered the phone around 1 in the morning to a barely understandable Josh. He was speaking so fast, my still waking up brain couldn't process what he was saying. When he tried to explain again after a deep breath, he told me that whatever it was had stumbled into the bear trap, roared, hit the wall with surprising force. I asked him if it had left, and he said he believed so, but that he feared for his family's safety. I told him he would be all right and that I would install a motion sensor camera outside his house the next day. He sounded disappointed, but agreed and hung up. The next day I could see the fear in Josh's eyes as we stood outside the hinged door. It was a face commonly seen at the showing of a horror movie. There was a slight blood trail leading from the door to a thick patch of woods that shadowed his house. We looked at each other and crawled underneath. The dirt inside was stained with blood and no longer maintained a beautiful brushstroke pattern I had looked forward to seeing. Instead, it was thrown about viciously, as if something had made a quick escape. When we got to the spot, I was shocked to see a few boards lying splintered in the dirt. Whatever this creature was, it was big enough to rip an entire board from the foundation. I took photos of the mess, a small blood sample, and set up a motion-censored camera over the hinged door and called it a day. Josh said he was going to take his children camping and leave for the night. Susan, for some reason, decided to stay home alone. The next day, I returned to the Powell's house before Josh and the kids. I rang the home phone to let Susan know I was going to grab my camera and leave. She didn't answer, so I went and knocked on the door. But again, no answer. On my way to the camera, I passed by that hinged door and was stopped by a strange footprint. I briefly inspected it, but it wasn't recognizable in the least bit and not easily describable either. I shrugged it off and decided to peek under the house. I instantly noticed a light shining in the distance. When I got closer, I noticed it was a large hole leading to their bedroom. I called Susan's name, but I only heard silence. Without thinking twice, I climbed through the hole and looked around. There was a wet spot on the carpet by the bed with an empty glass lying nearby, but there was nobody in the room. I walked into the hallway and saw a large streak of blood leading to the bathroom. I instantly gagged and seriously reconsidered just taking my camera and leaving, but curiosity gave me the strength to cautiously tread further. When I was about 5 feet from the bathroom, a voice spoke to me. "No, come in here," the voice said. My body froze, as I felt like I had just awoken from a falling dream. It wasn't Susan's nor Josh's voice. It was more mock-like, high-pitched, and really raspy. Something you would imagine a gremlin would sound like. "Big mess, leave," the voice said. "You finish. I come back to clean." It had a childish tonality to it. My mind was screaming for me to run, but my body was rooted to the floorboards. "Who are you?" I managed to sputter out. "Am you?" it said. The next thing I heard was a loud crunch, like that of a snapping bone, which sent a shiver sputtering down my spine, exposing my morality. I didn't want to imagine that thing eating Susan, but it's all I could think about. I threw up several times as I hastily made my way back through the hole and out into the morning sun. On my way back to the office, I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. They had asked me to slow down several times before understanding me. Finally, the lady on the phone told me she was sending a squad car over immediately and asked if I needed anything. I told her no and returned to the office. As soon as I arrived, I uploaded the film to my computer. All the photos seemed to be of Susan washing dishes in her kitchen window. I slammed my hands down on my keyboard as I stared at the last pic. It was taken at around 12 a.m. of Susan filling a glass of water from the sink. Just when I was about to give up, another photo was uploaded. It was taken at 12:53 a.m. I clicked next, expecting Susan to still be in the window. However, she was not. I got anxious as my attention shifted to a darker portion of the picture. That's when my eyes fell upon a large, gangly finger with a hunched-over posture and long, pointed ears. It stood about 6 foot 6 inches off the ground, with the arms reaching below its knees. It was peeling the hinged door open with one hand, while the other dangled to the side with long claw-like fingers. I must have stared at that picture for the 10 minutes before remembering to blink. Before I could make copies of the photos or see the results of the blood sample, they were confiscated by federal agents. The whole mess was cleaned up, and when I asked any questions, they said it was classified. The local papers reported that Susan had mysteriously disappeared and marked Josh Powell as the lead suspect in the investigation. When I tried to speak up for him, I was called insane. To this day, I don't know what it was that I saw outside of the Powell's home, and I never spoke to Josh again. Here's the latest news article about the case. Salt Lake City. In the nearly 13 years since Susan Powell disappeared, the Salt Lake Valley has grown rapidly, but one thing has not changed: intrigue in the case. It's a case that shocked the conscience. A missing mom yet to be found and presumed dead. The Powell case is still an open cold case under investigation by the West Valley City Police Department. 2 News talked to Salt Lake County Sheriff Rosie Riviera about why the case has captivated so many people. Before her sudden disappearance, Susan Powell seemingly had a premonition. She documented her valuables and gave a window into her world in a home video before her disappearance. The day after Susan suddenly disappeared, her husband, Josh Powell, insisted she wasn't with them on their middle-of-the-winter night camping trip 3 years later. In Washington State, Josh, as a person of interest, killed himself and the couple's 2 sons. The dynamics of how her children died that brought more attention, Sheriff Riviera said. Josh and his 2 young sons died in a house explosion during a supervised visit after he locked the social worker out. That was the most tragic story you've ever seen when it involves children, and I think that's why it's still in people's minds, Riviera said. If Josh had any answers as to where his wife was, he took them with him. Until they, find her, it's going to be a tragedy for the communities, Riviera said. Closure with no body recovered and a person of interest, Josh Powell, deceased, can be haunting for the family. It would be very difficult to find closure if you have a loved one who is still missing, Sheriff Riviera said. It just takes such a toll on the family. It changes their whole life. Susan's daycare provider, Debbie Caldwell, told 2 News she made a promise. I was the first person to go looking for her. I made a commitment that I would not stop looking for her until I found her. I'm going to figure this out. It may not be in this life, though, she said. Riviera said advances in technology have helped crack some of her office's old cold cases. Now, there is rumor, or not rumor, but there is a mine shaft that apparently Josh had been camping by, and a YouTube channel or whatever went down that mine shaft and supposedly found bones, but the bones never turned out to be Susan's. It's one of those channels that is very big, but like they had said, they had found that missing YouTuber out in the desert one time, which they never did. It's almost like they're like Geraldo Rivera cracking Al Capone's vault back in the 80s. They talk, but they don't provide. So, but that is the case, and I am going to be in touch with this sub, and I'm going to see what I can find out more about this, because this is shocking. I'm almost wondering if he didn't do what he did because he and the children were being stalked by whatever this was. I don't know if it's a Dogman. It doesn't mention a canine-like face. It mentions pointed ears, long arms that go past its knees. But maybe whatever this thing was stalking Josh and those children. and he felt that the only way. I don't know. It's a sad case. It's a tragedy, whatever it may be, or not whatever it may be. It's a tragedy either way you look at it. But it is very, very shocking, thought-provoking, and terrifying. You know, the longer I think about this case and what the pest control person had seen and whatnot, I honestly don't believe that it was cryptid related at all. I think it was more demonic. And, you know, in the paranormal community, for some reason, it's not talked about as much as it should be, but I really think that mental illness, especially like schizophrenia, should be looked at more. How many people that are diagnosed with schizophrenia are not schizophrenic, but are having demonic episodes. You know, it's just a tragedy either way you look at it. Anyway, with that was this early morning, middle of the night bonus. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that helps the channel to continue to grow and go. And honestly, what gives folks like all of us a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free, simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They're out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.